It is my privilege to introduce my mom, Tammy Cole. She lives on Bainbridge Island, Washington, with our family. Her husband and my dad, Michael, her daughter and my sister, Gabby, me, her son, Nathan, and our dog, Sam. She is co-founder of Optimistic Orchard, a nonprofit dedicated to regenerating the earth, healing her people, and inspiring others to join us. She graduated from Kiss the Ground soil advocate training, is taking a regenerative gardening training, and loves Mother Earth. She enjoys spending time with our family, listening to me play the trumpet, Gabby play the French horn, and our dad play the violin. She is an ordained minister, a writer, a kickboxer, and a yogi. She meditates and plays the frame drum. She is a contributor who positively impacts others and brings value to their lives for the greater good. She finds a way. She finds a better way because she has a gift to simplify complex and complicated things. I love her, and I bet you will too. Please join me in welcoming Tammy Cole.
Thanks for the introduction, Bubba. I love you too. And thank you all for joining me today. As Nathan said, I represent the nonprofit Optimistic Orchard. We are evangelists for the regenerative movement. We plant seeds literally and figuratively. We believe all living things have value. We believe in food sovereignty. We believe people thrive with healthy, nutritious food. We believe it all starts with the soil. Our work is entirely supported by donors and volunteers. We appreciate you tremendously. If you are not already, you too can be an evangelist for the regenerative movement by partnering with us. You can support our ability to give these presentations, help us reform the food supply, and regenerate the earth. Check out our website, optimisticorchard.org, and find us on Facebook to share our optimism. This is the fourth in our soil training series. The first was an overview of why we love soil so much. The second, a deep dive into how and why to rebuild soil. The third, a deep dive into regenerative agriculture. Links to all three of those are on our website and our Facebook page. Tonight, we will deep dive into the soil-human health connection. This is my favorite topic and one that is near and dear to my heart. Give me 1 second, technical issue, there we go. But first, I'd like to start with a meditation. So close your eyes or soften your gaze. Take 2 deep breaths. Relax and settle in. Think about sitting down to eat a delicious homemade meal. You may be at a large communal table or at a small family table. You may be inside or outside, or maybe you're at a picnic in the grass, or even on the beach. Feel what your surroundings are like. Smell the scent of mouth-watering food and the fresh air. Picture the area and the people you are with. Look at the bounty set out before you. There's a big green salad, lots of fresh fruit, juicy, regeneratively raised organic meat, maybe chicken, pork chops, or steak, or even all three. A veggie tray with cucumbers, carrots, peppers, celery, and broccoli. A bowl of creamy hummus for dipping. Connect yourself to the spread of food, to the soil that provided nutrients for the plants to grow, to the farmers and ranchers who grew and raised the food, to the people you are sitting down to eat with. As you look at the delicious feast that awaits you and smell the tantalizing scents, think about how you will feel after you eat this beautiful meal. You will be physically nourished, mentally strong, and spiritually awake. And when you're ready, open your eyes and come back to the room. So if you've been here or watched the other trainings, you've heard about how in 2007, Michael did a project measuring the trash at our house. We were stunned and ashamed by how much we consumed and wasted. So we shifted our lives to focus on sustainability, but it never felt like enough. Humans had already consumed so much, cut down so many trees, sent so much carbon into the atmosphere. And then we watched the movie Kiss the Ground at the end of 2020, and it blew our minds. Learning that we have a solution, soil, felt like a secret that's too good to keep. It reduces natural disasters. It revives farmer prosperity and security. It replenishes water sources and water cycles. It reconnects humanity. It reverses global warming. It recovers biodiversity and ecosystem health. And it restores fertility and human health. I grew up a fat and unhealthy kid in a fast food world. I didn't even eat one serving of vegetables regularly. I suffered from anxiety, depression, migraines, and a host of other health issues. I searched for answers everywhere. I started eating mostly organic food and phasing out preservatives and chemicals from my diet when we went sustainable. Every step helped, but nothing resolved it entirely. Switching to an entirely organic, mostly whole food, no sugar diet a year ago changed everything. At 43, I'm in the best shape of my life, mentally, physically, and spiritually. So I know firsthand the impact food has on health. And now I know scientifically why. A lot of the information you'll hear tonight comes from a report called The Power of the Plate by the Rodale Institute and the Plantrition Project. The report offers a holistic analysis of the rise of industrial agriculture, the connection to our poor diets and nutrition, and solutions to move towards regenerative healthcare. What the report finds is that while many Americans are living longer than their parents, they are not living healthier or happier lives. Lifestyle diseases like hypertension, cardiovascular disease, cancer, stroke, respiratory disease, and diabetes are on the rise. The standard American diet has come to consist of mostly processed foods that are high in sugar and fat. The rise of this diet is partly attributed to changing agricultural systems that prioritize yields and shelf life over nutrition. Conventional and processed foods lack nutrient density, adding to hidden hunger and the rise of chronic diseases. And industrial farming directly and indirectly affects human health via exposure to toxic chemicals and environmental pollutants. Whereas regenerative organic agriculture grows food without synthetic chemicals or salt-based fertilizers, while improving soil health, which increases nutrient density of food and helps combat environmental issues like climate change. But despite clear links between food and health, the healthcare ignores nutrition education for doctors and diet-based treatment. The solution is regenerative healthcare. Adopting regenerative organic farming practices, improving the diet through organic whole foods, and adopting lifestyle changes that reduce disease. The recommendations from the report are to emphasize education and collaboration between medical professionals, farmers, and consumers to identify the positive impacts of a whole foods organic diet. To integrate nutrition education into the medical education curriculum, implement localized integrated health initiatives that combine medical treatment with access to organic fruits and vegetables, and incentivize medical professionals to implement these practices. To fund more research for specialty crops and regenerative organic farming to improve technology and lower costs and incentivize these farming methods. And to provide increased financial and institutional support for farmers transitioning to regenerative organic practices. And to encourage food companies to support regenerative organic farms. So let's talk a little bit about the standard American diet. The components of the standard American diet are an excess of calories from processed and industrialized foods, inadequate consumption of nutrient-dense fruits and vegetables, inadequate consumption of nuts, seeds, and whole grains, excess of sodium, and an excess of chemical additives. And the standard American diet is intertwined with highly industrialized, chemical-intensive farming methods. Government policies incentivize farmers to grow crops that are easy to ship, store, and process, namely cereal and sweeteners. Corn is America's largest crop, and most of our corn is used for animal feed, ethanol, and processed foods. We discussed last time how degenerative concentrated animal feeding operations are. These farming methods use tilling, toxic fertilizers, and biocides, devastating to the environment and hazardous to human health. Now that we know the problem, let's talk about how we got there. Beginning in the late 19th century, global food and farming technologies began to change. Americans turned to convenience food. We shifted from small, diversified farms that feed one family or a community to maximizing yields of a few crops to store and export. Technology advances leading up to World War II amplified the problem. A method to generate nitrogen fertilizer by synthesizing ammonia from hydrogen and nitrogen was used to create munitions. Large-scale production led to surplus that was diverted to agriculture. So for the first time, material formulated to kill people was intentionally used for food production, creating a massive scaling of chemicals in agriculture. Previously to that, more farms grew crops and raised livestock at the same time. Animal integration is a key principle of regenerative agriculture. It's a closed loop nutrient cycle. So animal manure provides nutrients for crops and reduces or eliminates the need for synthetic fertilizers. But today, 88% of farms specialize in crops or livestock, and only 8% of farms produce more than 4 crops. So monocultures, or the growing of a single crop on a large acreage year after year, creates the need for greater chemical inputs. Diversity is another principle of regenerative agriculture. A lack of diversity and reliance on outside inputs leads to greater risk of pest and disease outbreaks and degraded soils. And as we discussed last time, this causes an increase in inputs, which leads more farmers into bankruptcy every year. Another problem is that fruits, vegetables, and nuts are called specialty crops and are grown on only 3% of cropland in the US. In 2007, there were only 8.5 million acres of specialty crops. That sounds like a lot, but not when you consider that there's 300 million acres of everything else. The USDA spends only $400 million studying specialty crops, which again, kind of sounds like a lot of money, but not when you consider that the total invested in agricultural research is $3 billion. The Farm Bill sets the policy that funds the agriculture and food system in our country, and it's reviewed every 5 years. This is a breakdown of what the $425 billion 2018 Farm Bill funds. A vast majority goes towards nutrition, which again is great. But the problem is the focus of what constitutes nutritious food. Investment in organic research increases from 20 million per year in 2018 to 50 million in 2023, which once again sounds like a lot, but that's less than 1% of the total research budget. So one of the things that Optimistic Orchard is going to be working on is a campaign called Regenerate America, with the intent to focus the 2023 Farm Bill on regenerative agriculture and to revamp the entire agriculture and food system in our country so that more funds are focused on organic and regenerative research and incentivizing farmers to use these methods. So now let's talk a little bit about what is the problem with all of this, the industrial agriculture and the pesticides and fertilizers? Over 3 pounds of insecticides, herbicides, and fungicides are sprayed on our food per person every year in the US. And it's not just sprayed on farmland. It's also sprayed in our communities, in our parks, and on school grounds. From 1996 to 2016, glyphosate use increased 1,800% in the US. More than 250 million pounds of glyphosate are applied each year. Back in the 90s, they told us that glyphosate wouldn't harm humans because it only affects what's called the Shikimate pathway, which animals and humans don't have. But the Shikimate pathway is a metabolic pathway used by bacteria, fungi, algae, some protozoas, and plants. Our gut bacteria, which regulates our immune system, do have a Shikimate pathway. So when glyphosate is applied, it impacts the gut bacteria. The World Health Organization's International Agency for Research on Cancer classified glyphosate as a probable carcinogen in 2015. And exposure to glyphosate may contribute to immune system damage, kidney and liver damage, and Hodgkin's lymphoma. It also may increase the risk of cancer, dementia, Alzheimer's, and other chronic conditions more prevalent today. In addition to that, agricultural nitrogen fertilizer use increased by 33-fold in the continental US between 1940 and 2015. Synthetic fertilizer is used to boost soil fertility, but it is not how nature evolved for plants to digest food. We talked last time about how plants convert atmospheric nitrogen into useful compounds. Certain plants take in the compounds to use for energy, to mature, and to produce seeds that grow into new plants. Organisms eat the plants, benefit from the nitrogen fixing, and when they die, they decay, releasing fixed nitrogen into the soil to be used by other plants. So as older plants die, they make room for younger ones, sharing fertilizer as they break down. It's yet another exchange that occurs between plants and microorganisms in the soil. Adding synthetic nitrogen fertilizers puts that whole system out of balance. Another issue is air pollution. Air pollution has been linked to cell dysfunction, lung damage, vascular inflammation, and it exacerbates asthmatic conditions. Agriculture and factory farming practices contribute to global emissions and ambient air pollution. In the last 70 years, global ammonia nitrate emissions more than doubled. This is attributable to emissions from agriculture. Nitrogen fertilizer use contributes 33%, and livestock production contributes 66%. But as we talked about last time, planned grazing reduces the livestock impacts on the soil and the environment. In the San Joaquin Valley, it's one of the most agriculture-centered areas of California, and it also has the worst air quality in the US. Another issue that I'm learning more about is antibiotic resistance. The spread of antibiotic resistance through conventional agriculture is a significant threat to the future of human disease control. Of all antibiotics in the US, 80% are sold for use in animal agriculture. 58% of these are excreted into the environment, and more than half end up in the soil. 70% overlap with drug classes important to human medicine. I watched a seminar this morning on the impacts of antibiotics on superbugs. And I'll post that on our website and on Facebook later on so you guys can go back and watch the review of it. It was really interesting talking about how antibiotic resistance is becoming a real problem for human medicine because they feed the animals antibiotics even when they're not sick. Now, we wouldn't do that with ourselves, so it makes sense that we wouldn't want to do that with animals. So that's a new area that's emerging that you guys can watch for and get more information on as the science comes out. You've seen this picture before in one of my other presentations. Fertilizer, herbicide, insecticide, and fungicide washes off fields during rain events or through groundwater leaching and pollutes waterways. Conventional farming practices leach atrazine, a known endocrine disruptor in amphibians, into the water table. Insecticides interact with the chlorination process, creating even more potent and harmful compounds in drinking water. This picture is of the Gulf of Mexico. The teal blue area is what's called the dead zone of oxygen depleted water, resulting from nitrogen and phosphorus pollution brought by the Mississippi River. Nitrate pollution in groundwater can cause restriction of oxygen to the bloodstream, and infants are most vulnerable. USGS surveys of surface water, well water, soil, and rain find that 70% of samples are contaminated with glyphosate or its derivative, AMPA. In addition to the direct effects of industrial agriculture on human health, there are also secondary effects. Conventional practices, including monocropping, repetitive deep tillage, the use of synthetic fertilizers and pesticides, and the absence of cover crops, contribute to the destruction of biodiversity below the ground. And more microorganisms in the soil increases nutrient density of plants, causing stronger plants that are less susceptible to infections and pests and requiring no synthetic fertilizers. And they also, increasing the nutrient density means that humans are able to take in more of those nutrients. Soluble salt-based fertilizers salt-based fertilizer use leads to increased soil mineralization, which leads to a loss of soil carbon over time. 30% of the world's arable land has become unproductive in the past 40 years due to soil erosion. Soil is being lost 10 to 40 times faster than it's being replaced. And by 2050, soil erosion may reduce up to 10% of crop yields. And soil is the source of more than 95% of our food and much of our clothing, building material, and as I said, antibiotics. About 78% of antibacterial agents and 60% of new cancer drugs approved between 1983 and 1994 originated in the soil, as did about 60% of all new approved drugs between 1989 and 1995. The effects of industrial agriculture on biodiversity are immense. Biocides directly deplete populations of beneficial insects. 1 teaspoon is enough to kill 1.25 billion bees. 40% of the world's insect species face extinction over the next several decades. And land conversion for the production of food is the #1 cause of biodiversity loss. Threats to biodiversity are threats to our economy and to our health. Biodiversity is crucial to the ecosystems on which humans depend, including farming and forestry. The annual economic and environmental benefits of biodiversity in the US are estimated to be about $300 billion. A significant decline in insect populations would severely affect our ability to feed ourselves because 1/3 of food crops depend on insects and to a lesser extent, birds and bats, which are also on the decline, for pollination. So one of the biggest impacts on human health is what is called hidden hunger. More than half of the world suffers from hidden hunger, which is a deficiency of micronutrients despite adequate caloric intake. Agricultural production goals that focus on maximizing crop yields have led to a significant decline in nutrient concentrations in the last 50 to 70 years. An assessment of the nutritional concentration of 43 crops, mostly fruits and vegetables, from 1950 to 1999 revealed a decline in most nutrients, higher water and carbohydrate concentrations, and a decline in grain protein concentration. In wheat, rice, and barley, as much as 30%, 18%, and 50%, even though grain yields more than doubled. And studies over rice fields found that increased atmospheric CO2 levels reduced concentrations of protein, iron, zinc, and B vitamins. So soil bacteria and fungi synthesize medically important compounds, and some can be extracted from the soil and used directly. As I said before, about 78% of antibacterial agents and 60% of new cancer drugs approved between 1983 and 1994 originated in the soil. Some compounds are transported to plants consumed by humans. Others interact with plants in other ways. Consuming some bioactive phytochemicals can prevent and reverse cancer, diabetes, heart disease, hypertension, and neurodegenerative disease. And these phytochemicals also play a critical role in our immune system. I'll talk about that again in a little bit. So as we talked before, organically managed soils contain higher levels of microbial diversity. Excuse me, and organic foods possess higher levels of bioactive phytochemicals. There hasn't been a lot of research done on this, as I said earlier, partly because there hasn't been a lot of funding, but there have been a few. A 6-year study in Dublin, Ireland found higher levels of flavonoids and antioxidant activity in 2 onion varieties. And a 10-year University of California study found higher anti-cancer flavonoids and immune-boosting alpha-tomatines that increased over time in organic tomatoes. And a Pennsylvania study that began in 1981 and continues today shows nutrient concentrations in oats were significantly higher in organic no-till systems. And I'm behind on my slides. Let me catch up. And then there's another Pennsylvania study that started in 2017, and that's going to test the nutrient concentrations in leaf, root, and fruit vegetables over a 20-year period. So we'll have to wait and see what the results of that will be. Clearly, more research is needed to verify and quantify the link between soil health and human health. But what we know is it's clear that organically grown foods pose lower health risks than industrially grown foods. This is due at least in part to reduced pesticide residues, heavy metals, and nitrates. And I said I would talk about our immune system. So I said earlier that the phytochemicals also play a critical role in our immune system function. Our bodies are made up of trillions of microbes that outweigh our DNA 10 to 1. 70% of our immune system resides in our gut. Our guts are always filled with dangerous pathogens like bacteria, protozoa, fungi, viruses, and even toxins. There's a complex dual action relationship between gut microbes and our immune system. When your gut is populated with the right kinds of bacteria, this relationship flourishes. But a lack of diversity and good bacteria in the gut leads to inflammation and infection. Microbes directly prevent pathogens and regulate our immune system. Some microbes even secrete antibacterial substances. So all of this is what's called a microbiome. And a microbiome is the microorganisms in a particular environment. As we've discussed, microbes make nutrients available to plants. A plant root is very similar to our lower intestine. A plant gets roots from the outside, and our lower intestine gets nutrients from the inside. A healthy microbiome is essential to the health of both plants and animals. As I said earlier, bacteria in our gut that makes our immune system function have a Shikimate pathway, and glyphosate impacts the Shikimate pathway and kills gut bacteria, which in turn lowers our immune system and impacts our mental stability. So that leads me back to my opening, which was now I know scientifically why eating organic foods makes me feel better and makes it so that I don't have migraines and mental issues that I was having previously. So I've talked a lot about the problems, where it came from, what it is, all of the issues, but I'm going to leave you with some solutions. The composition of our collective plates matters, and an organic, whole foods, plant-based diet is essential. It can provide all necessary vitamins, minerals, fiber, macronutrients, and micronutrients, and antioxidants to maintain health and build immunity. It prevents, suspends, and potentially reverses lifestyle diseases like cardiovascular disease, which is the #1 cause of death globally. It can prevent, suspend, and reverse the epidemic of type 2 diabetes, powerfully reduce inflammation, help heal IBS and IBD, more effectively reduce weight than any other dietary lifestyle, improve autoimmune diseases. It can prevent acne, enhance mood, reduce and resolve allergies, prevent constipation, reduce asthma, prevent dementia, reduce arthritic pain, dramatically improve kidney disease, significantly reduce the risk of colon and other cancers. It can cultivate a diverse microbiome in the soil and in our guts, as I discussed how important those are. It can optimize our immune function, and it can provide the greatest opportunity for rapid change globally. So, what is the solution? The solution is a holistic approach to farming that includes the welfare and animal of plants, animals, and humans. Removing toxic synthetic inputs like fertilizers and herbicides to eliminate exposure via diet, air, water, and occupation. Diversifying crop rotation to promote on-farm biological diversity and manage insects, diseases, and weeds. Maximizing soil coverage and diversity through cover cropping, permanent perennial agriculture, and integrated animal systems. Increasing soil organic carbon levels, resulting in greater soil structure and water holding capacity to maintain crop production. Supporting the growth of diverse microbial populations in the soil through natural soil fertility measures such as composting. Adopting planned rotational grazing to improve nutrient cycling and allow innate animal behavior to drive the process. Use productive farmland to grow food and fiber for people, not for inefficient biofuel production. Promoting and establishing conservation practices to protect our vulnerable waterways and aquatic terrestrial life. Providing a meaningful source of income for farmers and support for rural and urban communities. So, as with most things, knowledge is key. We need to emphasize education and collaboration, integrate nutrition into the medical education curriculum, educate consumers, implement more localized integrative health initiatives, incentivize medical professionals to implement lifestyle medicine practices and disincentivize chronic disease management, fund more research for specialty crops and organic farming, incentivize organic and regenerative organic methods, provide increased financial and institutional support for farmers transitioning to organic and regenerative organic practices, and encourage food companies to support regenerative organic farms. We must make a complete shift in the way we grow food to protect human and planetary health. There is a miraculous interaction between soil, plants, people, and the planet. Health begins with food, and healthy food begins in the soil. So, thank you all. Now we are going to, I'm going to promote you all to panelists and we can have a chat. Give me just a second for the technical. Here we go. And just to remind you, this is being recorded. So if you don't want to be on video or you want to stay on mute, that's fine. And I'm going to stop sharing so we will have the video. Let's see. Okay. I think that got everybody. All right. Anybody have any questions, comments? Let's chat.
No, I came in. I'm so sorry. I came in a little late. I'm so sorry. But you have some really good information there. I mean, what I heard, I'm like, yes, absolutely. Have you ever seen? I asked Natasha, have you ever seen Forks Over Knives?
I don't think I've seen that.
You watch it because, girl, you were right there. You were right there. It was on Netflix. I don't know if it still is. It's been a while. Forks Over Knives.
Forks, say it again. Forks over knives.
Forks Over Knives. And
writing it down.
You know, yes, you'll love it. Oh my gosh, you will totally nerd out on that. I'm telling you, I loved it.
Thank you.
Yeah, and it talks about how essentially what we eat, right, where it comes from, and just the evolution of food, and how our bodies were not meant to design for what we do consume, you know, and that's why, you know, we have such a high rate of cancer and diabetes. But what you were talking about, you have you know, less migraines, and you know, your body overall feels amazing. I've tried to do like a plant-based diet. It's really hard with the kids, you know, and I honestly, I'm horrible at like self-discipline, you know, in a lot of ways like that. But it's also mentioned, it talks about there's doctors that are now prescribing whole foods as prescriptions.
Yeah,
Medication
more should be.
Yeah.
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 I mean, it's kind of, I mean, it's a systemic problem pretty much across the board in our society, right? We look at how can we put a Band-Aid on it, right? Like you have a problem here. Here's what I was told with my migraines was take some Tylenol. If that doesn't work, I have something stronger I can give you. And my question was always, so what causes them? Oh, we don't know, but here's some medicine that will stop you from getting them. I'm like, it doesn't actually stop me from getting them. What it's doing is after the fact, I can usually get rid of it, but what is causing them? And it wasn't until I got down to, I actually started working with a nutritionist whose name is Danny Conway down in California. And she and I started working on identifying what it was in my diet that was causing them. Because I have strange allergies. I am not the normal allergies that most people have. The average people, like they'll tell you take out dairy, take out gluten. I do have gluten, but dairy is not one of mine. Eggs is not one of mine. Mine are things like celery, which has a naturally occurring nitrates in it. And I always knew that I couldn't have like bacon that had nitrates in it because the concentrations were so high it would trigger a migraine. But I had no idea that the low levels of nitrates that are in celery were causing my migraines. And so when I started digging into it more, I mean, it was amazing how much of my mental health, my physical health, all of it was tied in. I mean, obviously physical health is tied into diet, but it surprised me how much of my mental health was tied into it.
Yeah. Oh, absolutely. Oh, absolutely. I mean, you know, like potatoes have always been like, people are like, oh, don't do potatoes. It's starchy. It's a really bad carb. It's actually one of the best things we can have. Sweet potatoes, one of the best things you can eat. You know, and I also noticed, going back to your slideshow, you were talking about farming. Did you ever watch Kiss the Ground?
That's what started. So that's what started all this. Yeah.
Amazing, right?
Oh yeah.
Amazing.
Yeah, no, it blew my mind. Absolutely.
Yeah. I could watch that again, honestly.
It's good. What's that other one, Michael? The Biggest Little Farm? Is that what it is? Yeah, The Biggest Little Farm. That's another one that's really good. It's really good.
Cowspiracy was really good.
Yeah. There's a Seaspiracy out as well. I haven't watched that one yet.
Really?
Yeah, that one.
That would be good.
That's been recommended to me as well. Yeah, it's all about the fishing industry. Yeah, so interesting. Yeah. Thanks, Ashley.
Yeah.
Anybody else have questions? Oh, you can go ahead.
Oh no, I was just gonna say I love what you're doing. I'm into that. That's my groove. I love that type of stuff. Holistic all the way. Oh, I
Good,
love it. Yeah.
good, thanks.
I actually have a comment. You said that about the biodiversity is best for growing food,
Mhm.
and I remembered in 7th grade they taught us that the more biodiversity in human genes there are, the more humans thrive. Like the more
Mm.
variety there is in different people, the better it is. The better, like the more different two people's genes are, the better, the more healthy their children will be,
Mhm.
generally speaking.
Mhm.
And that, like, if like plants have genes too, so if the
I see where you're going with this. Yeah.
right, like if the microbes are super diverse and the plants are super diverse, it's going to have a healthier ecosystem than if there's just one type. The
Mhm.
same as if it would be if you had one type of human.
Mm-hmm. The same is true for insects, which is part of what impacts the bees, is they need a variety of, right? If you've just got fields of monocropping, they have to go from field to field to field to get the level of diversity they need to survive.
Right.
So it's true in humans. You're right. I hadn't thought about that aspect, but it's true in plants. It's true in animals. I mean, the more diverse we are, it's true of opinions. The more diverse we are, the more information there is, and the better we can collaborate, and the more we thrive. So that was a good observation. Any questions? This is my favorite topic. I think I said that in the beginning. I love when I learned, like, because I always wanted to know why, and I had anecdotally it works better for me, but people had asked me, why do you eat organic all the time? I'm like, I don't know, because it feels better, and that was just always my answer. And now to have the science behind it, I'm like, ooh, girl, that's awesome. I love it.
Tammy, can you talk more about that? Like when you made the switch? Because we all know that it is a little bit more costly. I feel like when I go to the farmer's market, it is cheaper. And then you build that relationship with the farmer, right? But then us being on assistance with food stamps, they give a benefit. So if you go and use your food stamps, then they give you extra free money. So like if we spend $20, they give an extra 10. And then it just kind of helps with that. But can you talk about how like you saw a change in your health, and just like you said, the migraines, you didn't realize like you consuming celery might have altered that or made it worse?
Yeah. So it was a slow progression for us. When we started, we were, Lord, now I have to think about this. So 15, I was, in my 20s, we weren't making a lot of money. We didn't have a lot, and we were just starting out, and we had 2 young kids, and we started with, we started by cutting out the processed foods, because those are like by far the most, so the cereals, the box macaroni and cheese, those kind of things, the chocolate, the candy, those kind of things got cut out first. And then we, and I'll have to post, I always forget their name. It's called the Dirty Dozen and the Clean 15. And it's an organization that'll list out what are the 12 most pesticide infected produce. Strawberries, I know, are at the top of the list. Things that don't have a skin are going to be most impacted by pesticides and fertilizer. Things that have a skin, oranges, grapefruit, watermelon, are not typically as susceptible because the skin will keep a little bit of it out. Things that have no skin are going to soak it up even more. And so we started looking at that and kind of phasing out what we could, and slowly over time building up and more and more and more of our diet was organic. And we now are to a point where we have it's called the CSA, which is oh my gosh, Michael, what does it stand for? It just flew out of my head. Something, I don't know. I'll think of it later. Anyways, the CSA, where we pay into one of the local farms. We put money down on an account, and then we can go either at the farmer's market or their farm stand and just pull produce. And so you get a much better deal that way if you can do a CSA. It supports the farm so that they know they've got money coming in, and they can offer lower prices because they're guaranteed income. And then you get, right, immediate fresh. The other thing is growing your own is always, even in small backyard, even in containers, you can do all kinds of different things to grow your own. And then you have complete control over what's going into your food. And then the other thing I always tell people is cancer treatment is expensive. So you can pay up front for organic food, or you can pay in the end when you get sick. And the bottom line is you're probably consumer supported agriculture. Thank you, Carrie. She put that in the comments. I'm like, I know it'll come. But I mean, that's the bottom line, right? Like they being the industrial agriculture industry wants us to believe that it's expensive. But another reason that it's expensive is because certification is required. So if in fact, which was my dream someday, if they had to certify that it was not organic, if they had to label that it was sprayed with pesticides, that would make so that going through that certification process would cost them money instead of costing the farmers who are growing organically money, because the certification is expensive. They have to go through a whole process. They have to jump through a bunch of hoops. They have to fill out paperwork every year. They have to prove all kinds of things that they did it organically. There are a lot of farms nowadays that aren't doing it, and they'll just say, or if you talk to them, they follow organic practices, but they can't afford to get certified. And so one of the things you can do is support in elections, support people who are for labeling of GMO foods and for labeling of pesticide-ridden foods, because if we can flip that script and make it so that instead of me peeling off my pink organic label every time, the people who, and that then the pesticide ridden food would be labeled, and they would have to jump through those hoops. Because the reality is that a lot of this is consumer driven. I mean, when we started eating organically 15 years ago, it was, I would say, maybe a third of the food in the grocery store was organic. And we would go places, like there were times when we would travel in like the middle of the country where most of the food is grown, where you could not find a single organic piece of food in the entire grocery store. Now, our grocery store where we live on Bainbridge Island is probably, I would say, more than half, probably closer to 2/3 is organic. And I have yet to travel in the last 5 years where we haven't been able to find organic food. So there is that shift happening, and it's going down. It's getting cheaper and cheaper and cheaper all the time. So the more and the closer to home that you keep the food, the cheaper it is, because part of the problem is the cost of transporting it across the country. So if you're using your local farmer and you're going to your farmer's market and they're able to keep the food local, they can charge a lower price. If they have to ship it off in order to be able to sell all of their produce, then it's going to cost them more money. So the more we can use the local supply and eat within the season instead of having food flown from halfway across the country or halfway across the world, the more we can do that, the cheaper it'll become. And this seminar I was watching this morning on superbugs was talking about, it's called Nyman Ranch, is one of they're a regenerative, they do pork. They have some really good bacon. It's a little salty, but it's really good. And he was talking about how part of the reason they started going to these practices is because consumers were asking at the grocery store, and then the grocery stores were calling them saying, do you have antibiotic-free pigs? And he said, the guy said he got enough calls that they were like, clearly people want it and nobody else is doing it, so we're in. And so that was how they started doing it, was just because they got calls from the literally grocery stores who were irritated because people are like, do you have antibiotic-free pork? And they're like, no. And then they'd go somewhere else. And so then they had people calling around, and that's kind of how it starts. And so as consumers, we are in a position to make change both at the bottom and at the top, right? We can make change in how we buy things and what we buy, but we can also make change in who we vote for and what we ask them to do. And so if we can bring those two things together, it'll make a huge difference. And it is making a difference. I mean, I've seen it make a huge difference in what's available. And one of the things that somebody was saying that I thought was a great comment this morning was, if every single person walked into McDonald's and said, do you have antibiotic-free pork? McDonald's would eventually make a change. And if McDonald's changed their practices, that makes a huge dent. So the biggest thing we can do is ask for it. And that'll drive down the cost, because then it becomes more available. Because if the
Thank you,
big
Tammy,
companies
for
are
that.
doing it, then it becomes more cost effective. Any other questions, comments? Got about 5 more minutes. Going once, going twice. All right. Then
No, I think you did good. I think you're right. You were spot on. I put it in the chat, but I gotta say it out loud. Absolutely.
Thanks.
Yeah.
Thanks.
Yeah, absolutely. I wish more people knew about this type of thing,
Spread the word, man.
Yeah.
That's what it takes.
Yeah.
We got to educate them. You got to share it.
No.
They will only know if we tell them. There's a lot of money and a lot of people behind big agriculture. And the only way to combat it is with small grassroots movements. I mean, that's how that's how most things have gotten done in this country, right? Free market economy, make it available for us.
Yeah.
All right. Well,
Absolutely.
as is my practice, I will send us out with a poem that I have written. Tonight's poem is called Thrive. Have reverence for the process, for the soil that provides nutrients so the plants may grow, for the plants that grow so we may eat, for the animals that lay down their lives so that we may live, for the farmers that joyfully tend the plants, for the ranchers that lovingly raise the animals. Have reverence for life. Live in balance. Give so that you may receive. Love so that you may be infinite. Heal so that others may heal. Grow so that you may succeed. Be calm, be grounded, be aware. Awaken to the possibility of optimal health, health of the body, health of the mind, health of the spirit, health of the earth, health of humanity. Awaken and take action, for we have but one earth, and she is in dire need of our assistance. So thanks everybody for joining me tonight, coming and hanging out, chatting, all of that. I look forward to getting together again soon.
Thank you again, Tammy. And as always, those poems are just so powerful and beautiful. I can't wait for you to publish them one day. Like every time I hear it, it's just like, oh man.
Awesome. Thanks,
Thank you.
Tasha. Thanks.
No.
Thanks everybody.
Thank you.
Good night.
Bye.
Bye.